Dana Hogerson's highs at Houston here in the Big 12, very few and far between. 2-7 in the conference, 4-8 overall. Did have some nice stretches of time, particularly in 2021 at Houston at 12-2. Fired by the Cougars after the one season in the Big 12. We got Steve Helwick on the line from SB Nation's Hustle Belt and also Underdog Dynasty to break down Dana Hogerson's tenure at Houston and also look forward to candidates coming up. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's been a pretty big day of college football news with the non-82 bowl eligible teams. A lot of them, we've seen some coach firings today, a lot of transfer portal moves. So yeah, their offseason starting today for all the teams that aren't qualified for bowl games. And then we look ahead to conference championship and bowl season after we get these coaching firings and that news out of the way.
And Steve, of course, you were on the scene right in the end zone for maybe Dana Hogerson's high point in the Big 12, at Houston at least, for that Hail Mary pass against West Virginia that pulled out one of the two wins, the other one against Baylor, but a loss to Rice and obviously not a good showing, although just about all the teams that entered the Big 12 this season stumbled and finished in the lower division.
Yes, the loss to Rice was the start of the conversation among fans about Dana Holgerson's future at Houston. Houston, they have beaten Rice. They beat them 7 straight times from 2011 to 2022. And in their first year in the Big 12, fans just didn't see that as a type of progress that they wanted to see in year 5 of the Dana Holgerson era, even though this was the best Rice team Rice has had in almost a decade. But that loss and the Cincinnati loss, when Houston was 4-5 after that win over Baylor, that walk-off overtime win, it seemed like they gained a bit of momentum. And Cincinnati, who's been the worst Big 12 team all year, the fact that Houston couldn't put them away at home to improve to 5-5 was another concerning loss. And after that, it just seemed like it reached to a point of no return with the fan base. Yes, Houston did have some good moments this year. They had the UTSA win. They were home underdogs in that opener, got that win with a great fan base. There was a lot of support early in the season. Everyone excited about the Big 12. They had the West Virginia walk-off Hail Mary win that you mentioned earlier. That was their first Big 12 win. Seemed like they could have turned the corner there. They fought Texas down to the wire the very next week. Bad spot in that game. Controversial spot prevented them from possibly getting a victory over Texas. They could have gone for 2 if they scored a touchdown. They were right by the end zone when that happened. So yeah, it was definitely an up and down season, but there were definitely more lows than highs for Houston in this first year in the Big 12, which I don't think many Houston fans expected to win the Big 12 or compete for the conference. But 4-8, I think with the losses to Rice and Cincinnati were the death blows that ended the Dana Holgerson tenure after 5 years.
Yeah, it seems pretty obvious that they're thinking, hey, we don't want to get buried in this conference. And while we get possibly run the risk of going further behind, we need to make a move now. Dana Hogerson with a $14.8 million buyout. Obviously, that can be compromised if he gets another coaching position. All right, Steve, let's look ahead. We got Willie Fritz of Tulane, obviously having a second consecutive outstanding season with Tulane. We got Jeff Traylor at Texas San Antonio, who lost his first conference game, actually, this past weekend, of course, to Tulane. So those two coaches coming off a meeting this past weekend seem to be the leading candidates.
Yes, I would agree that Willie Fritz is the number one option, and that's some of the rumblings that I've heard so far for Houston. Now, Willie Fritz has done an excellent job rebuilding Tulane. It's to the point where Tulane's just a team that's ranked and they're winning games, and we don't even think anything about it because we expect it. And this is just 2 years of Tulane success. It's amazing what he's done just to the brand name and the national respectability of that program. Is we just put Tulane in those New Year 6 predictions week 1, and they just stay in there the entire season. And yeah, they didn't win pretty this year in a lot of their games. They had a really good defensive unit that really carried them in a lot of their wins. And then star quarterback, senior Michael Pratt, who's reliable, doesn't make too many mistakes. So yeah, Willie Fritz has done a really good job at Tulane. He has a lot of Texas ties. He coached at Sam Houston for a while. He was the head coach there. And he also worked an assistant role there. He also had other jobs in Texas, such as Blinn, which is JUCO community college, where Cam Newton played before Auburn. He also worked in high schools in Texas, so he has a lot of familiarity with the Southeast Texas, Houston area. And yeah, with Willie Fritz's success at Tulane, Houston's hoping that they can get him after those few seasons. And I think one of the selling points would be similar to what PJ Fleck when he left Western Michigan to Minnesota is you have a very senior laden team that's accomplished a lot recently. And it's going to be a bit of a rebuild perhaps after some of these star guys like Michael Pratt, their center Sincere Haynesworth, who's NFL talent, their defensive tackle Patrick Jenkins, who's NFL talent, when some of these guys leave the program. So there's going to be a bit of a rebuild that Tulane needs to do after this year, kind of what we saw with Cincinnati the past few years after Cincinnati had all that NFL talent from that college football playoff team get drafted. And now Cincinnati's down to 3-9 at this point. So I think that is definitely a selling point Houston might use. Also, probably a lofty contract coming in there, and that Willie Fritz does have Texas ties. So I think he's a preferred candidate there. You also mentioned Jeff Traylor, who reportedly interviewed for the Texas A&M job. Not sure about if Traylor would leave UTSA for Houston. I know he got a long-term contract at UTSA. I'm curious what Houston would offer him there, but Traylor's done a really good job of building a program, a very new program that didn't have really any winning history prior to his arrival. They had just one bowl appearance in 2016 before Traylor got there in 2020, and now they make bowls every year. They've been in the conference two back-to-back CUSA champions. They were a win away from going to the AAC championship this year. If they didn't commit 5 turnovers on Friday, who knows what happens. So Jeff Traylor's done a really good job building that UTSA program. So he's definitely a candidate Houston would like to look at.
We've got Steve Helwick on the line, SB Nation's Hustle Belt and Underdog Dynasty, breaking down Dana Holgerson's vacancy after he was fired at Houston. Jeff Traylor and again, Willie Fritz, the top candidates. But Steve, you've made some connections that I find pretty interesting in regards to who could have, logical ties to this Houston position and who they might be going after that might extend this candidates list.
Yes, sometimes it's not always the candidates that you might expect. One that I think you're going to see in a lot of head coaching openings and definitely a lot of offensive coordinator openings at both the NFL and collegiate levels is Cliff Kingsbury, who served this past season as an offensive analyst and quarterbacks coach at USC, working with Caleb Williams. Cliff Kingsbury first really broke on the scene as the offensive coordinator with Johnny Manziel at Texas A&M in 2012 during that Heisman season. But before that, he actually worked with Kevin Sumlin at Houston with Case Keenum. So when Case Keenum became college football's all-time leading passer. So Cliff Kingsbury's had a lot of offensive success over the years, worked with Patrick Mahomes at Texas Tech, had a couple years coaching the Arizona Cardinals too, led them to a playoff appearance in the 2021 season with that 7-0 NFL best start. So Cliff Kingsbury's probably going to be one of the hot commodity coaches, especially for teams looking for an offensive geared coach. And that's what Houston's hired. Kevin Sumlin was an offensive-minded coach. Dana Holgerson, an offensive-minded coach. The Cougars didn't have an offensive coordinator. Dana Holgerson was the head coach and the play caller for the team. And Cliff Kingsbury could fill a similar position. Another name I looked at is Gary Patterson. Gary Patterson served the 2022 season as a special assistant to the head coach at Texas after a very successful long tenure at TCU, featuring tons of New Year's Six BCS Bowl appearances, even an undefeated season with a Rose Bowl win in 2010. Gary Patterson was a legend up in Fort Worth, and I don't think he's done yet coaching. He's only 63 years old. I think that's the same age as Willie Fritz, and I think that Houston could offer him one more go-round as a head coach. So Gary Patterson's also someone with a lot of Texas ties, and Texas is a very known high school recruiting hotbed, so having Texas ties, I feel like, is important to know the high school coaches in the state and all of that. So both Cliff Kingsbury, Gary Patterson, and the previous candidates we mentioned have that. Now, a few other candidates that I think could be interesting. One is Jeff Banks. He's the associate head coach at Texas right now, also works at tight end and special teams. Previously worked at Alabama when Steve Sarkisian was there. And he did have an interim head coaching role in the 2017 Belk Bowl with Texas A&M after Kevin Sumlin's firing before Jimbo Fisher fully went on to A&M. So I think that Jeff Banks, he hasn't had a bigger head coaching role than just one bowl game, but I think he's one of the rising candidates that could be in this mix. And another one who is the youngest candidate that I have, is Will Stein. He played quarterback at Louisville from 2008 to 2012. He's currently Oregon's offensive coordinator. Oregon is second in the country in both total offense and scoring offense. They've had a great year under Bo Nix, and Bo Nix is playing his best football after a very long college career. And before Will Stein worked at Oregon, he had jobs at UTSA as the offensive coordinator, working with Frank Harris and the Roadrunners in 2022 and 2021. And before that, he was at Lake Travis High School as an offensive coordinator there in Austin. So he has a lot of Texas ties, was a quarterbacks coach at Texas before. So he's only 34 years old, but I think he's going to be one of those young coaching candidates that really is rising up the ranks fast, especially how the Oregon Ducks have just obliterated teams with a very dynamic offense this year.
Steve, I think we would agree that it's championship weekend, and this is one of our favorite weekends, the two of us. I'm interested to hear your coverage plans this weekend.
I am going to, we already talked about him, Willie Fritz and the Tulane Green Wave for the second straight year. The Tulane's hosting SMU. Very unfortunate injury for SMU on Saturday, losing their quarterback, Preston Stone, who got carted off the field in the second quarter during that blowout, which was otherwise a great game for SMU. But still, I think that's going to be an excellent matchup. You have two teams that are both 8-0 in conference play. Neither team's lost in September. Tulane's only loss was Ole Miss without Michael Pratt. SMU's only losses were Oklahoma and TCU. Games that I felt like were closer than the score indicated earlier in the season, as both of those games were within 10 points in the fourth quarter. So I think that SMU Tulane is going to be a really good matchup. Tulane wins. They're in a New Year's Six Bowl for the second straight year. We saw what they did to USC last year in that Cotton Bowl. And if SMU wins, perhaps they could rise up in the ranks, pass up Liberty in the college football playoff rankings, and also secure a New Year's Six Bowl if they can get that signature win over the Green Wave.
Dana Holgorsen out at Houston after 5 seasons, one of those in the Big 12. Steve Helwick, SB Nation's Underdog Dynasty, and Hustle Belt breaking things down for us. Steve, we appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.